planning is extremely useful because it was really useful to think through what we thought the ideal outcome was and all that kind of stuff, right? But plans themselves,
sticking to the plan, not the greatest idea.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 494 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, or working in the games industry. Today is November 15th, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep our microphones turned on.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate it. All right, so we just got like a couple of things we want to talk about today. And then if there's time, we'll get a third of a question answered.
Yeah, the usual.
So first, there's a cool news item, which is GameMaker has their 25th anniversary.
Yeah, so congrats to GameMaker.
I'm not sure the exact date, but it's like, around now. Might be today, but it's around now.
What are they doing to celebrate?
Well, so to celebrate, they made a game called GameMaker, which is it's kind of like a game dev. I haven't played it yet. I just saw a little video. I was like, oh, that's pretty cute. It's like a game dev tycoon thing where it's like you are running the GameMaker company, which historically was called Yo-Yo Games. Now it's called GameMaker. Mm-hmm. So it's GameMaker that makes GameMaker, who made GameMaker the game.
Yep.
So you got like this office, and you've got like your people like trying to fix bugs and add features, and like they're getting snacky, and you got to keep them happy, and all this other shit.
Game dev tycoon style.
It's like a game dev tycoon, but you're building a game engine.
Are the characters the staff from the team?
I don't know. I know quite a few of the people from GameMaker, but I'm not sure. So I could see some resemblances, but I was like, I mean, it's a cartoony kind of game, so it's like it could be anybody really. But yeah, that's pretty cool, and it's also kind of interesting to think that. So I started picking up GameMaker in 2010, which I think was about when Sam. Because you did it, Sam, in summer of 2010, and then you
kicked it over to you.
Kicked it over to me in October of 2010. You're like, hey, you should check this out. And then nothing was the same ever after.
Whoops.
And
so that for listeners unfamiliar, GameMaker is the engine that we use for all of our games.
To this day.
Yeah, to this day.
And, it was at a time like I was I was in law school, and I had tried to pick up programming. I took computer science in college and just really kind of, I wouldn't say like I struggled with it, but I struggled to find it interesting. Because like programming especially at that time at the start was very much like, okay, take 45 minutes to set up your IDE, and then here's all the different dependencies you need to install and blah, blah, blah.
And then we're going to talk about null pointers. And
and then
I don't understand.
And you say at that time, but that is still how it is for
the
vast majority of programming.
GameMaker was like, drag and drop some explosions onto this shit, and you were like, sign me up.
Yeah, and it was like, and it was very visual too, because like like after my first and only semester of computer science in college, at the end of the course, I was able to make a command line program to calculate the cost of painting a room, right? And it's like, I think this is one of my rant topics. I'm not going to get really ranty about it, but that is like one of the things I think is the most stupid about all of computer science. Because I had the same problem, is that every time I tried to learn any programming thing, they were like, okay, you're running a business. Here's an employee object. I'm like, this is the most boring fucking thing you could have made me do. And like, and there's a part of that makes sense where they're preparing you for like, especially at that time, like a classical career making software where you're making shit that companies need to do stuff, and it is true. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff isn't that interesting, right?
It's interesting once you know what you're doing.
Exactly. It's interesting what you're doing, and when you're in the specifics that a particular company is trying to solve. What is not interesting is the general idea of like, here's an employee, here's their pay, here's whatever. Mm-hmm. Build a system that like lets you compute this or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, and also,
make the whole your examples interesting.
After an entire semester, I'm looking at this dumbass program I wrote, and I'm like, I could have done this in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And, it's like cost of painting a room calculator. Like it's like multiplying a few numbers together.
I think it's why I will still say that I'm a firm believer, actually, that making a video game is just the best way to be introduced to how to program, because it's it's an art object.
There's
it's inherently
feedback.
Interesting. Yeah, well, there's immediate feedback, and you don't get it from anywhere else.
Yeah, so Seth and I had very different paths into programming, except they were both, the commonality was games, right? So mine, I was doing a lot of other kinds of like programming stuff before that, but it was like for class. It was like using R to make charts and do analyses and whatever, like in college and stuff, right? But the first time I was like on my own, really trying to actually learn programming, for me it was C++. So it wasn't like visual, you know. I was still doing command line stuff, but it was through a book about making games in C++, right? And so I got to have fun because the things I was doing were just inherently interesting. Right.
And you can't do them in Excel. You know what I mean? Like you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't
do. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I can't recreate the same experience in other ways that I can already do. Right. Yeah. And nobody's trying to be like, yeah, I don't know. The idea of being like finding examples that are actually fun and interesting on their own and using those as the driver for learning. Like, it's just so weird to me that isn't just a core principle of like how education is done in computer science and math, stats, all of it, you know?
Well, and also, like I was at USC, which is a university that's generally obsessed with prestige. And so they didn't really hire professors who cared about teaching. They just wanted professors who seemed really smart and put out good research papers. And so that's what I got. Yep. But so like that was kind of my intro into programming, which was to say bad. And then it wasn't until 5 years later when Sam sent me GameMaker that because the thing is, like I knew about like, okay, like X and Y axis, that's easy, right? I know about that from math, right? Left, right, up, down. And then being able to like make a picture, make a PNG image. Like I think the first game I made was called like Dragon Bearzilla. And it was like, I just like went into fucking like MS Paint or something and made this shitty looking like Godzilla bear flying thing with wings. And I made these like shitty looking buildings. And then I was like, oh yeah, if I figured out how to like WASD can move this thing around, flying around on the screen. And then if I pushed spacebar, I could, you know, after about 2 weeks of like flailing around, I figured out how to get it to shoot what looked somewhat like a fireball out of somewhere near its face and and then the buildings would get hit by the fireball, and then they would like convert into a new sprite of like a crumpled building, you know? And like, it was just the most incredible thing I had ever done. And then that was it. Like, you know, it got its hooks in me, but and that was about, so GameMaker was like, you know, like 11 years old at that point, and it was still pretty rough. And it had been made by one person who was like, people should be able to learn how to program and like make games without having to like build their own game engine, which was kind of a groundbreaking thought at the time, you know, in like the early 2000s, late 90s, like 90s, you know. And so it's come a long way, and it's changing and improving all the time. And even like as we were working on Crashlands 2, a year into development, they're just like, hey, here's an entirely new paradigm of like ways that you can do stuff. And so I had like relearn all these new design patterns and new ways to do things. And honestly, like a lot of these new features that they've added over the past few years are things that have allowed us to actually make Crashlands 2 the game that it is. If we didn't get those things, things would turn out pretty differently.
Yeah, it would have been.
It's like they're still doing good work, and they're improving to this day. And so, I just want to give them a shout out. Like, congrats on the 25th anniversary. Yeah. That's cool. And we've been around for almost half of it,
which is also weird to think about at this point.
Yeah, we've been around we've existed as a studio for like 12 years and like 3 months or something like that. So we're getting there.
There's also something very fun and satisfying about working, because you know we're a tiny company, right? And in the game space, especially in the successful part of the game space, because it's so expensive and risky to be in games, the companies that are around tend to be huge, you know, especially in the game engine space. You got your Unity, you got your Unreal, right? Just enormous.
Where they can lay off 200 people just to save a little money this quarter. You know? That's like
And I think like we've had, with any game engine you choose, you're going to have frustrations the whole time. And we've certainly had ours with
Po Buddy's Nerfect, as they say.
But being able to just like know the people involved, talk to them, and not in the way we're like, we've also like met a bunch of people that work at Unity or work at Unreal, right? But there's a lot of churn in those places.
Well, they work in the dev relations department.
Yeah,
they're not the engineer that's actually working on the engine.
Yeah, and there isn't, like, we just know the team at GameMaker who's
but there also isn't the engineer. There's 100 of them or whatever, right? And but with the GameMaker, like we've known the GameMaker team as they have evolved, which has been really interesting, right? So as they've been sold to I think 2 different companies in the time we've known them, with different CEOs, different people like managing it, different people doing the work. And so we just get to
shifts in philosophies over time.
So we get to kind of like watch and participate in that process as it unfolds, which is, it's one of my favorite things about working, just running a company, is working with other companies.
They feel like partners.
Who you feel like an external partner who like you can have that kind of more meaningful relationship with, company to company, because you can have a relationship person to person. And those are pretty rare. And so I think that's like the one thing that no matter how frustrated I get with little details of like using GameMaker, the fact that we just know those people and can talk to them.
Oh man, it takes the edge off. You wouldn't believe.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it also means that like the issues that we have can get addressed, and like it's,
or at the very least we can make them aware, because of course there's like one of the problems that we've had historically is, well, it's not really solvable. It's just that a lot of the stuff that we're doing with GameMaker, most GameMaker users aren't doing. Like for example, when we were working on Levelhead, we really put the HTTP functions through the ringer of GameMaker and on all platforms, because we were even like testing it on Linux and stuff, and like we launched Levelhead on 7 storefronts.
Yep.
And most people using GameMaker, same with like Unity or Unreal or whatever, they're hobbyists who aren't like building full-fledged commercial games. So they're not using like the full extent of the engine.
And even when they are, most people don't have heavily web-enabled games.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we found so many holes in the HTTP functions of GameMaker that we were able to just talk to them about, be like, hey, we're kind of like building a whole game around this concept and it doesn't actually work. So what do we do? Right. And they worked with us and they got it fixed up. But it's tough because like for them, they want their engine to be used to make really cool stuff because it looks really good for the engine. Right. But also they need to allocate their limited dev resources toward things that make the engine usable for most of the people using it, which has nothing to do with HTTP functions.
Yes.
Right. And so like we're kind of in this weird spot where like we're making cool stuff, but we are often bumping into these weird edge cases that the dev team over at GameMaker probably really doesn't want to take the time to fix.
Yep.
But oftentimes they do it anyway for us, and man, we appreciate it. So it's been very cool. So again, congrats to them. And so then, so I think that's the only kind of cool little news item. Now let's talk about something horrible.
Let's do it.
So Sam wanted to talk about something called the economy of hatred. And I don't know quite where he's going. So let's see what Sam has to say.
Well, so things have taken a bit of a turn, right? I'll leave that
Not
there.
in the studio.
Not in the studio, but on like
outside of the studio.
And there's something I've been thinking about with this. And I saw an article published that was looking at basically a breakdown of actual sources on, say, Twitter, Reddits, just comments on the internet, even sometimes articles that you'll see around the internet, and asking the question, like, to what degree are these manufactured by someone who has a interest in
these meaning what?
These posts, these communications, right? So whether it's a tweet, whether it's an article, a post on Reddit.
Right. Like, is it a genuine person who just has a thought, or is it like
is there
something? Is there a plan behind it? Basically?
Yes. And you see this happening in both what I'll call like sort of benign forms on all of like social media stuff, as well as just news. as well as the more nefarious ones. The benign ones are relatively benign. Stuff like, it's stuff like, if we try to post like a gaming subreddit, for example, right? You kind of have to play the stupid thing where you're like, I got to post this in a way where it's like, because it's not an ad, but also like you are part of the community, but they suddenly don't like you anymore because you're now trying to like share something about a thing you made, which then
you're trying to make them do something. Or you're essentially
advertising.
Something.
Yeah, you're selling.
We have an incentive, I guess, to do that,
Correct.
Right? Because we want to share what we're doing, but also we want that to have a useful consequence, right?
Correct.
And it is true that when we go to those spaces, the main reason we share is because we want the useful consequence, right? Because
we want something.
Yeah, we're trying to get something by doing that sharing. So
yeah. And so what this research was looking at was basically the question of like, okay, if you really look at how the social media companies work now, as well as even news organizations and stuff, to what degree is like a lot of the communication being passed through these channels manufactured by entities that have something that they want to get from you, right? So not just a person posting them, but they want something from you. And then in particular, in this case, it was looking at like essentially the Russian troll farms, right? Which we've actually known about since I think like 2012. Like they're already in operation.
They've been around for a while.
Yeah. But they're not just Russian ones anymore.
Yeah, they're not the only one. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And what was interesting is basically there's a lot of hatred flying around right now, right? Stoking in the sense that like with regards to either world events, the U.S. election, whatever else, just a lot of online inflammatory stuff between people, right? A lot of even like taking a lot of satisfaction in other people being hurt. Whether it, is
a lot of tribalism and sort of like a cleaving of previous unities,
Yeah. And so after I read the article, and then I've been looking at if I'm looking at Reddit or news or whatever else a little bit differently, right? Through this lens of like, okay, when I'm looking at any one of these posts, who would want me to feel the way about this, right? That they are basically proposing here, or who would want me to have a reaction to this? What would the benefit be to someone else of me feeling the way that they would like me to feel because of this thing? And what was super interesting was that as I was looking through, I was like, there's a lot to be gained by particular people by making people hate each other, right?
Well, hate is an urgent emotion. It's the same as like, I mean, it's the outrage farming.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. Yeah.
Where it's like if you see something that seems devastating or dangerous or scary, it's like, I think crime statistics is an interesting example where there's kind of a cleaving right now of like how people are perceiving crime in the United States. There's people who are in certain information bubbles that believe that crime is a huge problem and that it's surging, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's people who aren't in those bubbles who are like, what are you talking about? Because statistically, it's down. It's fine. Nothing's really going on. But if you can make people feel like their life is in danger or, anything like that, then like they just glue themselves to the content,
right? Yeah. And so, but I think there's kind of an interesting question, which is like if you get people to, I guess I feel like it is easier to like instrumentalize hatred as a tool than it is to instrumentalize unity or
why?
Loving
I think it's people. because good news is when nothing bad happens. Right?
It's also
which is like
kind of.
I don't think that's true. I think good news is when something good happens.
Yeah, I think it's not quite true. I think though it's more so that like if
for example, like there's a lot of countries that didn't go to war today.
But what I'm getting at is that
which is great.
Who benefits when hatred is stoked is oftentimes there's a very clear designee of benefit versus in the case of like more of a unification, more caring toward one another. That's a very diffuse benefit that like everybody benefits from it, right? But not in a way that is concentrated on one person. So like, for example, if I can like blow up, I don't know, someone's business by like doing some funky shit, right? Because they're a competitor of mine, right? I get the benefits of that happening, right? By sowing discord, but like helping broadly
Well, I often think about these things as like a hierarchical worldview versus a flat worldview, right? Which is like oftentimes the hatred that you're kind of talking about is all about sort of declaring tribal boundary lines and then deciding which groups are supposed to be above which other groups. If you're above somebody, it's fine to take from them, right? And give to yourself. Unity is about sharing. Mm-hmm. Right. And if you believe that you're in one of the groups that's supposed to be at the top, then you don't want unity because that means you got to give stuff up.
Well, this is kind of
right to people who you would rather take stuff from.
Yeah, it's kind of where I'm going with this, which is like it's just I don't know. There's been this lens on how I've been looking at all these things now this past week where the question has been popping up where I'm like, it just feels very clear that like
it's
a person or a group, basically a consolidated, a narrow band of people would benefit tremendously from this kind of division being present, right? This kind of thing not happening, right?
And you're specifically talking about right-wing grifters to be.
No, that's the thing.
Right?
It's like I think you see it a lot we've seen it a lot basically on the right-wing side of things, but it's like it's essentially anyone who wants to like cleave along a line where if you just didn't fucking cleave it and instead look for the commonality there, it would like that particular orientation would be generally more beneficial to everybody involved. Like, for example, I don't know if there's some like thing you're protesting, right? What you often see is like people who are protesting who have a shared view about a thing being bad, whether it's like, I don't know, some kind of restrictions on rights or, genocides happening, whatever else. After a while, there's a cleave that happens within the group. The group's actually in agreement about like a thing being bad, but then now we're going to start fighting each other about
how to fight the thing.
Yeah, some more specific thing, or like basically there's this discord being put in there, right?
Yeah.
And like you're not, and now there's just all sorts of weird shit happening within that. And it's like, who's benefiting from that discord?
Well, I would say at a broader level, my take on this is generally that when you turn people against each other, then things generally stay the same or become more chaotic, right? So like if people are unified and they say like, we want universal health care.
Yes.
And that's something that everybody agrees on. Then at a certain point, the people who are in charge of deciding whether we get to have it kind of have to give it to us, because that's how voting works and stuff. But if they can make it so that we are attacking each other about this and can't agree on it, even though it's clearly to our benefit, then they don't have to do a goddamn thing. And they can keep stuff exactly as it is, which happens to be a way that benefits them tremendously.
You're either status quo, or you disrupt an incoming disruption in a way that lets you further concentrate power or wealth or whatever else, right?
Yeah. And so, or even like you're saying, kind of take away rights in a way that benefits the people deciding to take away the rights, take away access to healthcare in a way that benefits people who.
Yeah, and you could do this by making things with what are non-issues, right? And I think that's what's so fascinating about it is like this
putting a fucking mask on during a global pandemic.
Exactly. It's like there's things that you can do where it's like it's not an inherent like obvious torch point between any groups of people. It's like it is a very much a like
eating less meat. Driving an electric car,
so
having access to healthcare. There's lots of things that you can, if you turn people against each other, then the existing power structures just continue to exist.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of which is like what I'm trying to figure out is how does it benefit all of us, right? What would be the thing? So you're talking about like universal healthcare or I don't know, rights, people getting more rights for else. What would be a thing that actually would benefit everybody if it was fueled by a lot of hatred? And I can't figure out exactly. That's what I was like. So I was just like, I don't think there is a theme. So like anytime I'm seeing these now, any of these posts now where it's trying to inflame something about anything, right?
If you kick down your neighbor, your community is weaker.
Yeah, 100%.
Like it doesn't help. Doesn't help you, doesn't help them, doesn't help anybody.
There's a nuance here, which is if your neighbor is a fascist.
Yeah, go for it.
They're not helping you anyway.
But the thing is, the problem is like they're the one kicking down the neighbors, right?
Yeah. Sources of hatred should be hated and removed.
Yeah, it's the paradox of tolerance kind of concept, right?
Yeah, which is not really a paradox at all.
Yeah, but I think I think it basically was just that for whatever reason, just kind of running along that thought experiment and kind of coming to this end point where I was like, I don't think it benefits. I don't think there's a thing that for all of us would be better if we just like hated the shit out of each other more.
Nope.
And once I got there, I was like, so probably that means
it's a lock-in.
Yeah, probably that means that when I'm seeing some stuff about that is trying to make me really hate someone.
Or even just be mad, not even hate somebody, but just be mad about something that actually you don't have anything to do with, really.
Yeah. And I was like, maybe I should, whenever I see those things that get that reaction piece in there of like, let's pause, because who would benefit from me getting mad about this? Or like participating in this Discord.
It's always going to be the people who are already benefiting from everything that's already happening.
Yeah.
But well,
again, notice that there are some things that we should be mad about. Right. So
I'm not saying not being mad. These are different things. I'm not saying not being mad about stuff. I'm just saying.
Talking about hatred.
I'm talking about when someone is asking you to hate someone else.
When somebody's asking you to be mad that a trans person went to the bathroom today.
Yeah.
Literally does not affect you at all. Well, how could you possibly be upset about this? It doesn't matter. Leave them alone. Right. But I think it was on last week tonight, John Oliver pointed out that the Trump campaign spent $134 per trans person in the U.S. on anti-trans ads. They spent $200-something million
Wow,
on this topic that
is
all you got to do is just leave them alone. Just leave them alone. But if they can make you scared and make you hate people, then they can make you vote a certain way.
Well,
and they get to have a fuckload of money and power.
Actually, it's not even about the specifics. This is what I'm trying to get at, which is like, if someone's asking you in this case, like, yeah, hate trans people, or even like hating, it's along the same dimensions, but it's like hating anything specifically, when in reality, like
if you didn't, it would be fine.
If you didn't, it would be fine. Or if you didn't, there would be more options, more agility in how you could manage your response to things, or like bringing people together, moving people away from wherever their bullshit positions are on stuff, right? That are causing their positions of hatred, that are causing problems. Like, it's just, they're not doing the anti-trans things because they actually care about trans rights. They're doing it to get your vote so they can go dismantle the government. So you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's
so they can take more from you.
Exactly. So I'm like, every time someone asks you,
it's always been this way. I think the internet in particular makes it easier.
It makes it so much easier. And that was that report was basically, it was looking at, there's some percentages they were giving of like estimated, essentially estimated amounts of what's happening on these social media platforms that are like, to what degree it's being manufactured for this purpose. And it's
completely.
Like, yeah, it's like, it's such a tremendous thing that I don't know. It feels like I think
it's fair to say
has unfolded in the last.
I think it's fair to say that like if you're upset about illegal immigrants or trans people or whatever, it's just because you've been manipulated. Like somebody decided that if you felt that way, then they could take shit from you, basically.
Or use
and that's
you
just
to take shit from
or
someone
use
else.
you. Yeah, like you're being used. And that's just the way. Because like it doesn't benefit you at all to walk around pissed off about something that somebody else is doing that doesn't affect you.
Yeah, I think hatred generally makes you into a puppet, and so you always have to ask the question, like, okay, who is the puppeteer? Who's got their hand up my butt? Who's got their hand up my ass? Because this is ridiculous.
Somebody, a lot of people probably.
Yeah.
That's an interesting. Yeah, and I think when it comes, so Sam, you mentioned this book quite a while back. It was called "Same as Ever." Mm-hmm. So I've been reading this book. It's a great book. And one of the things they talk about in this book, so it's a book about things that don't change, things that kind of just keep repeating in history, or, like things that we've seen before, how people behave, or cycles, like economic cycles and political cycles and stuff like that. And one of the interesting things they brought up too was how during the Great Depression, we had actually like insane GDP growth, like insane. And like most of the U.S. highway system was built during that. Most houses got electrified.
Most of our infrastructure
Most of our infrastructure was built during that. That's where we got Social Security. That's when we.
I was going to say these
Medicare.
are all because of enormous spending programs from the federal government.
But here's the thing. People have been wanting to have the government able to do that shit forever.
Yeah.
But they were fighting about everything else. Mm-hmm. Right. And then suddenly the whole fucking world collapsed. Mm-hmm. And then people were willing to finally do shit and come together and be like, okay, we have some real problems. Like we need to do whatever it takes to fix this and get things going again. And all that bullshit just kind of flew out the window for just a little while, just long enough
but that
we could actually like make some positive change.
That's not a guaranteed outcome, as we saw with the pandemic, though, right? Is if people are safely insulated from some disaster, right? Then they will.
Then nothing has to change. Really.
Then they'll leverage the disaster. It's we see like the fucking hurricane deniers and like all this like just weird shit, right? Because if you can leverage it to your ends, then and you're a sociopath, so you don't care how many people you harm in the process. Then that's what you're going to do. If you're a right-wing grifter, just to get to
So what kind of happened then is like as long as we are sort of on average as a society relatively comfortable, as long as we can still put food on our table and still put gas in our tanks or whatever, then this kind of shit will just work. It'll keep working, right?
Well, and by we you mean enough people who have collectively enough.
Yeah, that's why I said on average. Because there's a big income distribution problem and wealth inequality problem in the U.S. and which is stratifying even further, right?
Well, it's actually advantageous to keep people below that threshold because they don't have the time.
They don't have the means. And so there can reach a certain breaking point where those techniques of like pitting people against each other can't work anymore because other things end up sort of taking priority, and it's never a permanent thing, right? It's just enough to get like a foot in the door. And so you never know. I mean, things can change, but it does take, as long as things are relatively stable, they won't. And then at a certain point, something will happen, and then they have to, and then they will,
but not necessarily for the better, So correct. It could still go.
That's what I'm saying. Just watch.
I think here's the thing. I think eventually for the better. I think in the short term, it's just chaos. I think things go up, things go down, bad things happen, good things happen. People try to take advantage of whatever's going on to their own benefit. But yeah, I mean, I think progress does happen in the long term, and you just got to try to keep at it, keep pushing on it.
Yeah. And that's why it requires effort, because otherwise it doesn't happen in a short enough time scale to matter to actual people.
Well, and don't think that like just because things are trending downward at a certain point that they will forever be going downward. That's historically that has never been the case, right? And
the pendulum swings around pretty.
The pendulum just keep on swinging. So just grab on and try to swing it in the proper direction whenever you can, it's tough, but no, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for talking about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I think one of the related things to that note that's a little more, it's like the same thing, but a little more specific with like the troll farm concept and stuff, is anytime someone's done an analysis of the source of like most pieces of misinformation, or even things like banning library books, right? There was I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but it was completely insane, where it was something like there were like 12 people responsible for almost every book banning in like the United States.
It's so easy.
Yeah.
Because you just need one belligerent asshole to be like,
to just overwhelm the system.
Yeah, to be like, I'm scared of X, or I don't like that people are different from me, whatever. Therefore, get rid of this book. And it just takes one cowardly school department receiving that to get a book ban. That's all it takes, right? And if these people they just mass do it. It's a small number of people with all the time in the world, right? And this is true of like troll farms and like all these kind of things.
Or paid to do it in those cases. Yeah.
Or sometimes they're paid, but again, they have all the time in the world, right? Because that's their whole
it takes just
job.
a tiny number of people with a lot of time to break just about anything.
So many of the things that these like manufactured issues are constructed by, and it's not even necessarily small numbers of randoms. It can also be small numbers of politicians who then figure out how to turn it into a plan, right? But in any case, like it's these like most of these things that we're dealing with that are creating all of this stuff are just manufactured things by small numbers of people, and that's the origin of it, right? Which is just, it's so insane that like 12 people can bend the education system of the entire United States towards limiting access to books. Right.
But I think even if you zoom out a little bit further and ask the question, like that particular activity, the amount of energy that then goes into people yelling about it, talking about it, hating each other about this fact that this is happening, right? Drawing lines and taking sides now is such a tremendous suck on.
It's just a waste of
energy.
time.
If it only took 12 people to basically ban all those books And then you got thousands of people online now arguing in comments about it. You got thousands of people
going to school board meetings, screaming at people.
What a tremendous waste of time. And again,
we could be doing so much better shit.
Or just not that. I don't care. It doesn't have to be great.
Yeah, or just hang out.
I would be careful implying that the waste is the people being mad about the fact that happened, rather than how much waste is being generated by the fact.
I'm not implying it. I'm saying that both of these things are fucking huge problems. And I think like they're both huge problems. There's just tremendous amount of energy and waste being spent on then the downstream, like just kind of like, I don't know.
Well, it's that people who give a shit and are trying to like create a better world are being forced to waste their time fighting people who are just trying to constantly ruin everything.
Yeah, because to me, that's the like my takeaway from it, which is different than saying like this isn't a two-sided problem, right? This is manufacture the problem. Like why this is such a problem is because you can manufacture so much of it so cheaply.
Yes.
And
then the clean, it's like
it just gums up the works.
It's so costly. Yeah, it's hazardous. Exactly. It's so costly to deal with, and there's not an obvious way to deal with it, right? Because if the position that you're taking is basically like, especially if you're pulling levers of
there is
violence or legal levers and so on, then there's not really any recourse besides to be mad about it and try to leverage like shame or overwhelming population or something to counter it, right? And so it makes sense that is the counter response. And I think that makes sense. And it's horrible that has to be, right? Because as you're saying, it's such a fucking waste, right? But the source of it is these like small numbers of just evil fucking people.
Well, yeah,
who are able to waste everyone's time by doing this.
Yeah, well, what I'm getting at when we're talking about waste here is I see the split you're trying to make there as far as like who the problem is. But what I'm getting at is that the broader point is that you're immersed in a system that essentially is like it's orchestrated in such a way that you have to be constantly personally on the defensive against this stuff because it is
you have to fight it.
Yeah, it's a constant and insane just barrage of these things. And that's just like it doesn't stop. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's books.
Yeah, but that's the weird thing.
But if you don't respond to it at all, then all the things just get to happen. All the horrible.
But here's the weird thing.
I'm not saying not respond.
But things are set up in such a way that the response doesn't permeate, right? Because like if people are getting so riled up about stuff because they're in an information bubble, right? Because basically what happened is, like you're saying, a handful of people will decide that something it needs to become a problem. They make it a problem, right? And then you'll have a subset of people who are kind of existing within that same information pocket on the internet or whatever, like based on what message boards they're on or what Twitter feeds they follow or whatever. They all kind of rile each other up. And then once that spills over into the real world and starts having real consequences, book bans and whatever else, that's when people on the outside of that bubble start to see it and they're like, wait, what the fuck is going on, right? So then those people start responding.
Quit it.
Yeah, and also quit it.
Quit it. Mm-hmm.
And so those people start responding and they start making their own posts on Twitter and they go to their own message boards and blah, blah, blah. And there's not crosstalk. Like everybody's got their own information bubble and now they're just independently angry, but nobody's convincing each other of anything.
Well, but I think that assumes the goal is convincing, which I don't think is the goal. I think the goal is solidarity on both sides, but the side that I care about is the side opposing the shit. You know, the goal is an expression of solidarity, which is to be like looking around, everybody being like, "This is fucked up," right? And all being able to agree,
which is important to note.
It's important to note because otherwise, this
is not normal.
Yeah, and also, not everybody can do something about any given thing. I
guess I would underscore it. No one can do anything about everything. So, like, that's a very hard line. Underlined thing that I think is an important reinforcement on the internet, right?
Clarify what you mean.
No one person can do anything about everything.
Yes, right? That's true.
You can't be mad at, and this is again this whole hatred thing. You can't be mad at every single person for not doing something about whatever it is that you're doing stuff about.
But you can be mad at all the people causing all the problems.
Yes, that's what I'm saying though. What I'm saying is you really shouldn't be mad about. So like we had these hurricanes.
Yeah, that's what I'm just clarifying. Like it's completely fine. And
you're saying I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed
to be mad at all of the people creating the problems that we then have to deal with. Right.
Correct.
And I would go so far as to say it's fine to hate those people because That's a natural response to them constantly assaulting you to try to make your life and the people you care about's lives worse.
That's the appropriate place for that.
But they're being manipulated into causing the problem.
Well, who knows?
Right.
I don't care why they're causing the problem.
Yeah,
They're
maybe.
still a
I don't
problem. Knowing
Like,
why is part of how you try to figure out how to fix it, right? But it doesn't change the fact that you should not be a piece of shit and should just know better, And so at root, I still get to be mad,
Yeah, again, I'm not saying, in no way am I saying you don't get to be mad about stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm just clarifying. I'm just making sure.
There's a limit to the usefulness of just being mad about stuff. There's a limit to the usefulness, and you have to ask the question whenever you're hating on something, to what degree is that hatred actually a thing that I am going to get something out of, right?
Is it in what way has it been converted into something tangible or useful
or someone else just using it to get something from
just keep things going.
Yeah. We're just taking
and at the root of that too is like, it's actually about whether the thing is true or not, right? Because all the things that you're talking about like what someone's getting, whatever, like the benefit comes in the fact that it's not true, right? That's the reason that you stoke up the thing is you're taking something that just isn't true so that you can use people's belief that it is true as some kind of a lever, right? So when you're coming to the question of like, am I being manipulated here? Mm-hmm. The first question to actually address that is this actually true, right? Because if it's not true, you're being manipulated.
Skip to the end. Yeah.
You've already answered that question, right?
Is it true? And then the second layer is, if true, does it matter?
Yeah, it doesn't
matter. You gotta get away from it doesn't matter, because I think it doesn't matter. It's too easy to have a bunch of takes on versus just asking who benefits from me participating in this, like in this way. I think if you answer that question almost every time, then I think you can,
and also
because you can argue mattering
and who is harmed. Because sometimes the benefit is just the harm, and that somebody just wants to cause harm. So I think both of those are important. Of who is benefiting from this, and or who is being harmed by this, right? Yeah, and both those help you get at the question of.
That does require a certain amount of, because oftentimes it's like, it's not even just who is benefiting, but it's just, is this harming me? And the answer is always yes, right? As in like if somebody gets me to want to dismantle the Department of Education and vote for somebody who says they're going to do that, is that bad for me? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's bad.
Well,
right?
No, the problem is if you a lot of people apparently, given the world we're in right now, can't follow the me far enough.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Is that the problem is like trying to ask that question of like who benefits and who is harmed requires you to zoom out and introspect and think about the broader implications in the long term of what it is that somebody's trying to get you to do. Right. So like I
don't know. I think it's easier to answer the question who else benefits from this than it is to answer the question how do I benefit from it?
And I think it's more important to. Yeah, and also, I think it's more important to ask who else is harmed, because if you don't, then you don't. Like if you're only thinking about your own harm, that's also where you're the most easily manipulated. In other words, the easiest to believe the lie, right? Because
but the problem here is like there's a worldview angle here that makes it easy to answer that question in a way that just reinforces. So if you're somebody who has a problem with LGBT people existing.
Yeah.
And then somebody comes in and they're like,
to be clear.
Yeah. And somebody comes in and like, we want to ban this book because it mentions that gay people exist. Right. And then you come in and you're like, oh, well, I agree with that because I think them existing is bad for me. So I think, we should ban this book. Right. Because your worldview has kind of put you in a space where you do believe that you benefit. Right.
No, I mean, if you say, I think again, you have to ask the question: who else benefits? Who else benefits? Not me, but who else benefits from, like in this case, I don't know, ban on some LGBT thing, right? Not about like I think it's bad, so it benefits me. That's it's just who is getting something out of this transaction, really.
Yeah, but again, like that requires you to have an understanding,
the core promise here is no matter what strategy you take, the people who need to take it will not be taking it.
Yeah, because again, like I was saying, there's these information bubbles here where like if you developed a narrative about the world because of the information pocket that you live in, then every decision you make is justified and it is the right one, even though it's not. But your framework of how you think about things allows you to believe that that's the case. Like for example, that that people who were upset about inflation just voted for a guy whose economic policies are guaranteed to cause insane inflation if it actually goes through as described. And every economist on earth has looked at this and been like, yeah, this is bad, but the information pocket that these people are in tells them that that's not true, right? And so the problem you have here is like you're kind of thinking about this from an angle of a person who's trying to take a more nuanced view of things and understand the broader implications of stuff and actually know what's real and not.
And cares about the difference. Right?
Well, no, I mean, I'm not even going as far as you guys are. I mean, I appreciate you going as far as it, but I'm not even going that far. I'm just saying, as a person walking around on the internet, that's all I'm saying.
Well, I think you're right in the sense that if somebody's trying to piss you off, there's a good chance that they're trying to rob you. I think that's
for some reason. I think that's generally like true. Yeah,
that's just always how. Yeah, somebody's trying to keep you from caring about the things that would benefit you so that they can take shit from you. Yeah. Because if you start advocating for yourself instead of advocating against other people, then now things have to change. Yeah. So if they can make you pissed off at everything around you and everybody around you, then you will be so busy screaming at school board meetings and yelling at teachers and calling up election officials that you'll go your whole fucking life without getting healthcare. You'll go your whole life without getting anything that benefits you.
Again, nobody has to do anything. Point, it's like, there's plenty of bad shit, and there's sources of that, right? There's sources of that. There's truths of that. People doing bad things, right? To be deserving of some hatred, right? But my point is like the nuance to me is like when someone else asks you to hate something, that very specifically, right? Not like when you hate something,
or partly something that you hadn't even thought about. Right. I think that's the part where you can kind of tell that it's manufactured, right? Where like you hear about something and you're like, oh, I didn't know about that, right? I haven't thought about that at all, right? That means that it hasn't affected you at all up to this point because you didn't even fucking notice, right? And I'm talking about like things around you, not like something happening on the other side of the world because, you can't notice something that's 1,000 miles away, right? But, if somebody's trying to make you upset about illegal immigrants, right, and it has never touched your life up to this point, and suddenly you're upset about it.
Thing to me, morbidly, is hearing like Midwesterners interviewed talking about how worried they are about illegal immigration. And I'm like,
what?
Having had no exposure to like to that like period, right? And like just but having bought into the idea that this is such a problem that it affects me now, even though like I can't.
You wouldn't have thought about it if somebody didn't tell you to think about it. And I think that's kind of the seed there to be like somebody's deciding what to piss me off about, and they're doing that so that I can't help myself. That's really what it is. Yeah. So it is an economy in a sense that like it's all about money.
Someone's
it's all about money and power at the end of the day.
Money and power, yeah. Someone's profiting off it. So just if someone asks you to hate something, just like, I don't know.
Maybe don't.
Just at least pause.
Think about it. Why?
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we got time for one brief question.
We'll do it.
So like we said, third of a question. Let's fucking go. All right, this question comes from podcast.bscotch.net. Highest upvoted question comes from Captain Jazz, who says, hey, bros, you all have periodically mentioned how you dedicated time to pre-production at the start of Crashlands 2 development and how beneficial it was to cultivate a general path forward. If you had done the same type of pre-production for Scuffle Buddies, do you think you would have gotten as far into the development of the game as you had, or do you think the core of the game would have looked drastically different if you had planned out as carefully as you had with your current project?
I would say Scuffle. Well, I guess the question is like, what does that pre-production do, and how do you have to do it so it actually does what you want it to do? And I think the problem is
do you know enough to even do pre-production?
Crashlands 2 ended up the way it did because it's a sequel to Crashlands 1. Right. It already had a million constraints and design principles and all this kind of stuff baked right in. Scuffle Buddies was a random new IP, like it was a completely out of nothing.
We didn't know what the hell it was going to be.
Yeah. So my answer to that would be that I don't think pre-production is just, extra upfront planning and thought work and experimentation before going into the building.
It's basically trying to make the expensive choices cheaper. That's all it is. It's like saying, okay, what do we need to do to make this successful? Can this actually be successful? Let's look at that. What would we want to, what features do we want to
Which
include?
we did do.
We did all that stuff, right? Yeah, all that. But I think importantly, to me, the thing people oftentimes skip when we're talking about pre-production, and I think that really underscores in this question, is like, if you don't know what production is yet, you cannot do pre-production. And that's actually where we were with Scuffle Buddies.
Yeah.
It was very iterative. We were still trying to figure out how what all the pieces would even be,
and how to manage a team and like a business. Like that was in the early post Crashlands success days when we hired people not knowing how to hire people. We managed people not knowing how to manage people. We managed processes with a bunch of people not knowing how to manage processes. We didn't know what we were doing, and we
didn't know what production was. And so I think that the error is basically, if you still don't know what production is, and then you go do pre-production, you're just doing some other random shit now before that. I think pre-production
it wouldn't have helped anything, I think is the short of it.
I think in general, pre-production in that context makes everything worse.
Yeah.
Because pre-production, you have to have an understanding of how your team works, where your bottlenecks are, resource constraints, timeline constraints, on top of like how challenging certain parts of the game are. Like one of the things we talked about with Crashlands 2 was this idea of being able to manufacture authored content at scale. And in order to do that, we knew we literally couldn't with the current production practices we had, right? That's not an insight that we could have had.
Yeah. And we needed to know not only that we couldn't, but we also needed to know how to address that and be confident we could do that successfully, and that the investment to get there would give the payoff we needed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But there's a funny angle to that, though, which is pre-production didn't directly tell us that this was going to be a problem. What pre-production did was it gave us the scope of the project.
Yes.
So coming into it, we were like, here's all the stuff we want to have in this game, right? After a year of working on it, we were then able to, we're checking in with our vision, with the plan. After a year of working on it, we look at the plan and we're like, shit, we're not there. Like we need to make some big changes to figure out how to get from where we are to where we're trying to go. And in our pre-production plan, we didn't say we don't have the tools to make this, right? We didn't know that at the time.
We did. Well, we did it.
But because we had the plan,
we were able to realize at the very beginning. But I remember the first internal pitch I did. Your first response was like, "I like it, but we literally can't build this right now." Like I think it was like almost verbatim, like one of the first comments. And then that was and which I knew.
That's usually my response.
So it is, but it was a production related one. Not a fear one.
Yeah.
It was just I'm here on board with this, but just so we're clear, like we don't have the capacity. We don't have the way we're doing things lined up in such a way that producing something like this would even be possible. So that's the first thing we need to address. But I think like even that,
but a big part of that was actually because of the multiplayer angle that we still had at the time.
Yeah, that's true.
So it wasn't because from like a scale or scope perspective, Crashlands 2 on paper wasn't dramatically bigger than Crashlands 1. It's just more complex. There's a lot more deeper interactions between things and stuff. But like the volume of quests and items and stuff isn't, it's not like 10-1 or something like that. It is more, but not.
I think along those, I think to then Sam's point here, or Seth's point actually, about what we had pre-planned successfully and whatever, right? I think that component was kind of missing because, as Sam was saying, like you can only know so much until you're doing the work, or you really know the shape of the work, right? Which includes knowing your team and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, on paper, as this said, like it looked like Crashlands 2 was a bit bigger, right? But we got a bigger team. We got more resources. We're better at what we do. So on paper,
should have been fine.
But all of those extra things that added complexity and the extra manual stuff and so on changed the nature of everything in a way that was not predictable by us, right?
Well, we couldn't really understand know it was going to be more, but we didn't know.
Yeah, we couldn't understand how much more. Yeah, and I think that point about the handmade world, every asset being meaningfully unique, actually in some way, right? Because like on paper, you're just like, oh yeah, we just kind of need some data fields basically or something, so we can represent new concepts, right? And we just need some systems that allow us to make that all kind of happen. And like all of those just they add up. They add up to a wide amount of unpredictability. Because I don't think any of us thought it was going to take us until 2025 to get Crashlands 2 out when we were designing it.
No, did not think
in 2020, right?
We thought probably 3 years.
Yeah, we thought like, probably 2023.
Because we had a lot of not tech development but tech transitions. Because we were like, okay, we want to use Spine, which you'd never done, so we need to learn a new animation pipeline and develop new tools around that. We switched from Inkscape to Clip Studio, Clip Studio Paint, Clip Studio, Clip Studio. So we have a whole new set of art tools, but also those need to integrate into the game in a whole new way because it's just a new way of animating stuff. We did a bunch of experiments with like visuals and shaders, and we knew that was going to take a while.
Well, like, as far as like that pre-production plan, that was part of it. Like that was part of the pre-production plan. It was saying like we're going to do all this tooling transition, and we're going to do this more marketing, like try to go for a more marketing oriented build order instead of just prototyping gameplay.
Like visuals first.
Yeah, visuals first. So we can get something that looks really fucking good and start talking to people about it within 6 months, like. Yeah.
So we were like 6 months of like visual dev and tools transitions, and then like 2.5 years to build the game compared to the first Crashlands, which had no visual dev and 2 years to build the game. So, it's just like, think about the same amount of time, but like with some front loaded, like visual practice and stuff. But because of, we hit a point where we weren't really, as we looked back on the first game as, and like compared it to our vision and where we wanted to go, I think the theme that kept coming up was everything should be interesting.
Yes.
Right. And in the first game, it was like, okay, like I got my saw and I chop a tree, and then I get my next saw and I chop the next tree, and each tree is the same as the previous tree. It's just a different picture.
In original Crashlands, the like art was interesting, and the story was interesting, and the systems were interesting, not particularly unexpected, but interesting how they all worked, right? But the details of like each individual thing was not distinct enough from each other individual thing, like within a category. And so we had a handful of like specific interesting things. And by handful, I'm doing like a bunch of specific things, right? But most of the stuff that you interacted with in the game was in the like, it was interesting because of the system it lived in category, not because of it itself.
Right. Yeah. And so we kind of ended up with like a template in the first game.
Yes.
Where it was like every like you'd build a crafting station, and then that has 3 weapons in it, and it's got 4 pieces of armor in it. Bam, 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 right? And then you build your next tool, and you just kind of work your way through that loop 18 times.
And also think about how little, that still required a lot of effort to like plan and make sure to get the numbers to work, all that kind of stuff, right? But with Crashlands 2, we were like, we want to flatten things out so stuff is less, everything's more interesting because it's unique, but also things aren't disposable, at least not to the same extent. To do that,
more longevity.
Everything needs to be pretty flat rather than being a linear kind of growth pattern, right? And as soon as things are kind of flat and you have like an open worldy kind of a vibe, and the questing allows you to kind of take different paths, like different parts and stuff, right? As soon as you're doing that, then all of a sudden you go from like basically a linear progression map of like, what are the assets? How do you work through them? What damage do they do? Like all that kind of stuff, right? To which we've never shown publicly yet, but to what we have now, which we call the progression map. And that fucking thing is insane. It's just, there's so much stuff in it, and it's good tooling.
A red string conspiracy theorist board is essentially what it is.
Yeah. And you can't look at it and just understand what's happening. You have to interact with it to understand what's happening, so that things can like appear and disappear. Lines can be drawn, because the whole thing, I don't know if any listeners have ever tried to take some kind of a system where a whole bunch of things are different other things and try to like draw a map of that. The moment there's like 20 things with an average of like 2 or 3 connections, and you're trying to look at it all in one go, fucking
it's just spaghetti.
It's impossible. In our case, we have 4,000 things, right?
Yeah.
All networks into each other in some way. And there's not a way to be like, yes, we can look at this and understand what's happening. So that was, I think, the other really enormous, unpredictable
breakthrough
part of all of this is the impact of flattening things out.
That's true. Yeah.
How that would change how difficult it was to manage and wrangle and debug and balance and test,
Yeah, I think what it is like there's a lot of stuff in the pre-production start, like area, where what you want to do is it's about trying to identify both what are the valuable decisions to be making right now, right? It's like, what in our case, what are the changes we make Crashlands 2, or in the case of Scuffle Buddies, how does this game work in a way that would be marketable and interesting to people? And then also how can we we build it, which really gets into like risks. That's what pre-production is all about, trying to couch your risks, where it's looking at the things that you've declared are of value and then trying to, as quickly as possible, get to a point where you're like, we know
answer questions about it.
Exactly. That was always what it was. What is the next biggest question we need to answer? Was sort of how you went with it. But it was interesting, I think, in the Crashlands 2 case, and part of the reason why it was really good we did pre-production, I think, for sure. But it's one of those things that we've gone back and forth about as far as like the exact efficacy of certain parts of it, because like Adam, to your point, you, especially on the design side, you cannot know the impact of like the echoing gigantic impact of certain almost throwaway statements.
Yeah,
that
because
also
like it's
don't seem like a
obviously
big
true
deal.
that it's better if stuff is less disposable and more interesting. And,
Yes.
and you could just say that, and I just did it, right?
Yeah.
What are the consequences though, and how does it impact the entirety of production?
Yeah, or you could say like
everything?
it's clear that would better fuel these design pillars for us, right? Like we want stuff to be able to, like your decisions to be a little more I don't know, personal, a little more important, which means that kind of you shouldn't just be thrown shit away all the time. We also want to spend a little more time on any given resource, any given armor set, whatever else. We're doing more of this animation work. Okay, so that means that actually every single piece is going to cost more to make. So we definitely need things to last longer, because we can't make 19 tiers of shit like we did in the first one, because they're all so much more elaborate than they used to be. So all of that makes sense together. But I think the power of that particular echo into the rest of the design is tremendous.
So pre-production kind of helps you know where you're going.
Yes.
But also one of the things that definitely happened with Crashlands 2 was I'll be interested to kind of do a postmortem where we go back and look at our original design doc. Because what definitely happened in most of these game systems was we overcorrected in one direction first.
Yes.
And then they all landed somewhere between Crashlands 1 and the design document.
Yeah.
Right. So like an interesting example, like Adam was talking about the leveling curve. So in Crashlands 1, it's an exponential curve. So it's like every level of equipment that you build is, I think, like 20%. Or
like
something.
You start with like 100 HP and you end with like tens of thousands, like 50,000 or some crazy shit. Yeah.
And the reason for that is, and you see this in a lot of games, like World of Warcraft has this kind of a curve. A lot of RPGs have this curve. And the reason is that if every level of like weapon you get is 20% better than the previous one, then it's always better by the same proportion than before. So it always feels good to get that next sword or whatever. If you use a linear leveling curve, which is actually what things like in D&D use, like Baldur's Gate 3, that has a linear curve. So that means, like, let's say a sword does 10 damage at level 1, a level 2 sword, 20 damage, right? That's twice as good.
Huge.
That's fucking huge, right? Well, if you're adding 10 damage per level, well, that means the level 3 sword does 30. So now it's only a 50% jump.
Yeah. So basically,
And it doesn't feel quite as good.
In linear systems, you need to be able to go more broad as things progress, because basically things have to get more interesting. Because
so it's that early game progression feels vertical, as in like every new thing you get, like, wow, that's so much better than the thing I just had, right? But then the game has to open up more laterally as you go to higher levels, because you can't just keep giving the player the next level of item and have it feel like anything worthwhile. And that was actually something that, in order to kind of solve this like disposability of items problem, that was something we really wanted to do. We ended up landing on that linear curve, like what Baldur's Gate has, where the beginning of Crashlands 2 will feel a lot more like Crashlands 1, in the sense that you will be getting new items at like a not as fast as Crashlands 1, but like at a decent pace. And a lot of times they're like noticeably stronger than the thing that you just had.
Yeah, but it's also because at the beginning of the game, you're noticeably weak against everything.
And so you don't really have anything.
And, so if we don't give you a huge boost very early, we also can't make you feel weak early, because then we didn't get to make you feel less weak. You know what I mean? Like,
well, and early game, like, you're dumb as a player. You don't know anything about the game, but what you do know is big number bigger than smaller number, right?
But also it's the synergy of all the things that add together too, right? Because you don't have any armor either, right? Because like once you start adding things together, it gets a lot more complicated, and the player gets to make more choices about what happens. Because if all you did was just get the better weapon each time and remained naked, right?
Yeah,
that's a choice you can make. But if we designed around that and just made the weapons more powerful as if you didn't have armor, then that's a different kind of a total outcome than if we say, well, you're probably wearing armor too, though. So the weapon doesn't need to be as powerful if you're also getting better armor to like collectively.
Well, again, it's the power of going wide as you
Exactly,
open up the game later.
Yeah, so what kind of happens then is like over time in Crashlands 2, as you move through the leveling curve, the number of like linear progressing items, like new weapons, new armor that are just like it does the same thing as the previous level of that. It's just better, right? The pace of that slows down, but then the number of weird permanent items you get opens up.
Yeah, your options get wide. Right?
Yeah, so you keep getting more and more of these weird gadgets and trinkets that like open up new set bonuses, and then you get like new pets that interact with how those play styles work and stuff. And so the game becomes much more complex and opens up more laterally toward the latter half of the game, where in the early half of the game, it's a bit more power progression, just like straight up, like you're just getting stronger, you know? So what's kind of interesting about that was like, so the game is divided into 3 acts basically. And each act feels pretty different from the one before it, in a pretty cool way. And we also add some new kind of like interesting mechanics twists and new kind of weird ways to interact with the environment and stuff like that in each of those acts as well. So it has something that the first game just didn't really have. Like the first game felt more samey as you got deeper into it, and this one feels more interesting and diverse as you get deeper into it.
It has more of an arc to the experience than the first one. You go up, you sort of like have the experience, and then you just keep on having that same experience.
Keep having it. Yeah.
So if you get tired of it, well, okay, bye. You know, and
and our goal with Crashlands 2 is like anytime you come across something new that you haven't seen before, an environment or like a story thing or whatever, that you have to be like, what's going on with this thing? Because there's always something.
And back to that design, like the upfront design, because the point you were making was that we ended up somewhere in between Crashlands 1 and whatever was in the design. But what was in the design?
The design was just essentially what we currently have, but sort of
much flatter.
Yeah, way more.
As in like you would get a
removing the concept of a level, basically, right? So that things were just interesting because of their details rather than because the number was bigger.
Yeah, you get like a sword, and it's like that sword is just as good at the end of the game as at the start of the game. You never upgrade it, blah blah blah. But that means that that we would have to like meter out items much more slowly.
Yeah.
And also trying to find a way to make it so that the player, no matter what the player did, we accommodated for it in a combinatorial way. So like if you skipped the middle half of the game and went to the end, technically your equipment is still good enough to just do that.
Yeah, it was way more flat at the beginning.
The amount of complexity in that design is something that we just couldn't really grapple with.
But also didn't sound like it would be fun
in there.
You know?
Yeah. It can be fun in an open world sense, because basically that would shift our focus away from like Sam was saying, in the first game we had like 18 tiers of armor, right? And in Crashlands 2 we have fewer than that, but they look way cooler, and you know you get them more slowly. And
I think I think a good example of that is also a game like the Fallout games, where you can you get your like 10mm pistol at the like very early in all the games, right? And you can use that at the end, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But it's definitely less good. Like it's effective still.
You found. Yeah.
But you're still way better off using the insane sniper rifle that you found or whatever, right? But you can get by, like nothing has to be thrown away because it's useless, except maybe a BB gun. But even then, you can still kill rad roaches with that BB gun, you know?
This is one of the main differences, though, which is like this Crashlands 2 is still very much in the crafting genre.
Yeah.
Like as far as power goes. So your power comes from making new things.
Yeah.
Not from leveling. And basically, as long as we keep that tied together, then there's only so far we can push backward, right?
Yeah, because then it's like if let's say you get the sword that you wanted in the first 20 minutes of the game, and you're like, I like how this sword goes. I'm just going to keep using this sword forever.
Yeah, how is the rest of the game still interesting enough to keep you?
Yeah, as you come across some new thing, it's like, oh, here's this new resource that you can like harvest, and then it gives you these items that you can use to make this crazy gun or something. Like, yeah, but I got my sword, so like, who gives a shit, right? Yeah, and so the problem with the completely flat structure is it kind of really pushes against the crafting side of things. And so we had to find a middle ground where it's like, there's always new stuff to build that makes you more powerful. There's also new stuff to build that adds weird playstyle options and diversity to what you can do. And like everything's connected to the crafting system and the questing system as you kind of move through the world, so that there's always a reason There's always a compelling reason to interact with stuff and do things, which you don't really have when nothing is disposable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of middle ground. Yeah.
And so they kind of to circle back on the question, which is about like the pre-planning, all this kind of stuff, right? I think the main sort of takeaway is as true as it's always been, which is that planning is extremely useful because it was really useful to think through what we thought the ideal outcome was and all that kind of stuff, right? But plans themselves
sticking to the plan,
not sticking to the plan,
the greatest idea.
should never be the goal. The goal should always be to adapt to what happens when the plan hits reality, right? And any plan, once you start trying to enact it, will diverge further and further and further if you don't also update the plan according to what actually happens when you try to implement it, right? So, but it's that idea that like, this is why also like I don't like game design documents that much in general because they're kind of treated a little too like religiously, you know.
They're not a sacred text.
It's like this is the Bible, and not everybody does this, but especially new people coming in, come to game dev, treat the design doc as like, if I can just get this right, then I'm ready to start making the game or pitching the game or whatever, right? And the reality is you can't get that right. It's just not possible. You can, but you can do
game design
still
doc
do
is a
useful
compass.
stuff.
But there's still a mountain in the way, and you might have to go around it or something. And like, you're not necessarily going to always go the direction that your compass says.
Yeah. So you don't want to work out every little detail because you're going to have to throw almost all of it away. But what you do want to do is still like have like the plan. Think like, what is it you think would happen? Know what you think your most important aspects of the game are, your design pillars, the emotions you're trying to convey, like all that kind of stuff you want to know very early. And the kind of the bigger picture it is, the less likely it is to change once you start implementing the plan.
Yeah, all those abstract high level pillars stayed exactly the same. Yep, from the start.
Yeah.
So,
and I think we've all seen the Leroy Jenkins video, okay? And what people don't realize, like it's an old World of Warcraft comedy video. These dudes are sitting around, they're talking about what they're about to do. They're like, we got to run into this room, and then you're going to cast this spell, and you're going to do this thing, and they have a plan. And Leroy's sitting there AFK, not listening at all, probably not even at his computer. He gets back to his computer and he's like, all right, let's do this. And he just fucking runs into the room and just a million dragons pop out of eggs and it's just chaos, right? But what people don't realize about that video is it's a cautionary tale about plans. Okay. Because what happens is they stick to the plan. They try to do all the stuff that they agreed to do beforehand, even though Leroy just fucking ran in there.
Yep.
And having played that game for 20 fucking years, I can tell you that the situation that they found themselves in was 100% easily salvageable, actually. They could have easily just killed all those dragons and moved on. But they had a plan, and they stuck to the plan.
It's a story with two parts, right? One is don't throw away / ignore a plan for no reason, right?
Yeah.
And the other one is once reality meets the plan and they are not matching, fucking adapt.
Yeah. Because it would have been fine. I mean, it was hilarious in retrospect, but plans are not rigid. So adapt. All right. That's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It'll help boost it up the charts as we bear down on the launch of the game. And we'd appreciate it. So thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.